Welcome to Soldiers' Lost Voices, a military history storytelling channel centered on the human side of war. We go beyond tactical maps and body counts to bring conflict to life through wartime letters, frontline diaries, memoirs, and first-hand accounts. Before we begin, answer this in the comments. If you had only seconds to decide and everything was at stake, what would you do? In today's episode, we step into They were stunned by the daylight torpedo run that rewrote Pacific Air power. And by the end, you'll understand why the correct method can become the wrong one overnight. Late morning. Salt spray on glass means you have no extra seconds. The 2nd of March, 1943. The Bismarck Sea. A gray strip of water trapped between weather and war. The wind comes in low and cold, and it rakes the ocean into white stitches. A twin-engine bomber drops beneath the cloud base until the world turns into two colors, steel water and darker steel sky. In the late morning, the crew feels the first flecks of spray slap the windshield like handfuls of sand. 10:17 a.m. Cloud base low. Multiple ship contacts ahead. Closing distance measured in minutes. Staff Sergeant Evan Red Mallory, a waist gunner by paperwork, a lookout by necessity, presses his forehead to the vibrating metal and squints past the prop blur. His action is simple. He counts masts. His body sensation is immediate. The aircraft shudders as if it's breathing through its teeth. His micro-choice is smaller than it sounds. He decides not to blink when the sea jumps up to meet them, because the moment he looks away is the moment a ship turns and the math changes. The manual says you attack ships from altitude above the worst of the guns. Reality says the only accuracy left is down where the spray lives. Records differ on some small details in this campaign. Crews later argued over what day felt like the turning point, and stories sometimes drift to the 7th of April 1943. But the outcome is consistent. In early March, a major reinforcement convoy was struck again and again until getting through stopped being a plan and became a wish. The choice hangs without being spoken: wait and lose, or go in low where every gun can see you. Red tastes metal in his mouth. He can't tell if it's fear or the way the oxygen mask strap rubs his gums. He watches the lead ship's wake, that bright V of churned water, and realizes it is a ruler laid across the sea. If the wake angles left, their line is wrong. If it angles right, the ship is already turning into the run, and the run is already late. A fragment from the paperwork reads a report. Fragment crackles through the headset, clipped factual. The kind of sentence that never makes it into a movie. Convoy sighted. Multiple contacts. Expect heavy fire. Maintain spacing. It's not poetry. It is the sound of a clock starting. That minute cloud base low. Multiple ship contacts ahead. Closing distance measured in minutes, not miles. Red's inner conflict is embarrassingly human for a war that's supposed to be math. He wants to live, and he wants to be worth the fuel they burned to get here. The rule against panic is simple. You do not chase the noise. You fly the line. For a moment, his mind slips to a private thought. He thinks about the spray and how it will soak into their boots, and he wonders if he'll still feel wet when the shooting stops. Seconds later, it resolves when the first burst of anti-aircraft fire walks up from the water and turns the spray into steam. They won't be wet later. They'll be alive or they won't, and the ocean doesn't care. A bigger loop opens and refuses to close. What happens when doctrine meets a target that is fast and defended? The answer will not arrive with a lecture. It will arrive with a decision that costs time, altitude, and comfort, and pays in something else. The camera of memory cuts to the ships for a heartbeat. Men at gun tubs, shirts stuck to backs, hands on hot metal, eyes narrowed against glare. They see the bombers coming low and cannot believe anyone would choose it. A small win arrives as a near loss. The formation holds its spacing through turbulence, and nobody drifts into a friendly's guns. For a moment, discipline beats instinct. Then the risk sharpens. The next run will demand more than discipline. It will demand a new playbook written in spray flak, and the thin, reckless line between close enough and too close. Section 2, the convoy that had to get through 10:38 a.m. The sun breaks through a tear in the cloud deck and turns the sea into a sheet of glare. It is the worst light for spotting gunfire and the best light for seeing mistakes. The crews call it hard daylight because it makes everything honest. Late morning, hard daylight makes mistakes visible before they become fatal. The convoy isn't a symbol to the men flying toward it. It's cargo and timetable, reinforcements and supplies headed toward a front where men on the ground are already counting rations and rounds. Somewhere in New Guinea, troops will either see those supplies arrive or they won't. That's the stakes, plain and unromantic. Red Mallory shifts his grip on the gun mount. Action, he checks the feed and the charging handle. Body sensation, his wrists ache from holding tension against vibration. Micro-choice, he decides to keep his voice calm when he calls what he sees because panic spreads faster than any rumor. A brief switch in point of view snaps to the bomb bay. A mechanic's hands tape on a fuse, a smell of solvent. It's not a glamorous moment. It's someone making sure the weapon will behave when it hits the sea at the wrong angle. Another switch cuts to the cockpit, a pilot watching airspeed, listening for instructions, trying to keep the airplane steady while the ocean rises in the windscreen. The manual says, your safety comes from distance and altitude. Reality says your safety comes from doing something accurate before the target moves out of reach. The tactical decision is brutal in its simplicity. Trade altitude for certainty. Go low enough that you can place ordnance where steel meets water and accept that every second down there is a second inside every ship's gun envelope. The cost is immediate. You fly into the flak that the manual promised you could avoid. The rule against confusion is simple. One call, one correction, one aircraft at a time. Evidence drop comes in the form of a terse radio fragment, the kind of language that sounds like it was born for emergencies. Mast-Height. Hold it, now. It is not a speech. It is a measuring tool. 10:38 a.m. Glare on the water. Closing fast. Gunfire visible. Window to attack shrinking as ships maneuver. A fragment from the paperwork reads, debrief fragment attack timing adjusted to glare and moving wakes. 2 questions start the engines of attention. A question flickers immediately. Why are some aircraft not aiming at the ships at all, but at the masts and decks? 30 seconds later it closes as the explanation arrives in action. Coordinated strafing is used to pin gunners down, not to minces. Destroy for its own sake. Suppression buys seconds, and seconds are the new currency. A larger question hangs over the run. Can a bomber survive repeated passes at this altitude? The answer will ride on coordination, because coordination is what breaks first when fear is close enough to taste. Coordination failure shows up as it always does, not as a dramatic betrayal, but as 2 human beings hearing the same words differently. A bearing call overlaps with a spacing call. One aircraft drifts half a wing length toward another. The cost is felt in Red's chest as he sees a friendly nose slide into the same lane of fire. Someone yells, "Brake," and the formation flexes just enough to avoid a collision, just enough. The near miss steals precious seconds from the attack run. Inner conflict line, Red realizes he trusts the men beside him, but he doesn't trust the air to stay predictable for 1 more minute. Then a first real win, the lead element holds the line long enough for the suppression to work. For a heartbeat, the ship's gunners flinch, and that flinch becomes a gap in the wall. This is where the myth starts to form, the idea that it was reckless. But in the cramped real estate of low cloud and defended ships, reckless is sometimes just another word for the fastest available math. If the environment changes, the correct method can become the wrong one overnight. CTA brief and sincere, arrives only now after that first true payoff. If you want more stories where doctrine collides with reality, told through the human hands and voices that carried it, stay with us and let the small details do the heavy lifting. The risk sharpens. The next pass won't be a demonstration. It will be a commitment. A bomb at the wrong angle will skip away into nothing or skip into a ship's side and change what air power means in the Pacific. Section 3, Skip Bombing, written in water at 10:52 a.m. The sky over the sea looks calm from a distance, the kind of calm that makes people in other places think a battle should be tidy. Up close, the air is full of minute violence, shockwaves from bursts, fragments cutting invisible lines, and the constant punishing vibration of engines held just below their limits. The ocean is a weapon when you read it correctly. The phrase skip bombing sounds almost playful until you see what it asks a crew to do. It asks them to fly low enough that the water becomes part of the weapon. The bomb is not simply dropped. It is introduced to the sea at a precise moment with a hope and a plan that it will bounce like a stone into the vulnerable side of a ship. Red Mallory watches the surface and realizes the ocean is not a flat thing. It is a living, skin-ridged, shifting, willing to betray you if you misread it. Action, he calls the ship's movement as it changes. Body sensation, his throat dries until words scrape out. Micro-choice, he chooses to say steady even when he feels unsteady, because the pilot needs a calm world. The manual says bombs fall. Reality says sometimes they have to run. The tactical decision arrives at the worst time. Commit to the release point even as flak thickens. The cost is not theoretical. The cost is altitude you cannot reclaim in a second, and a straight line run you must hold while every instinct demands you jink and weave. The rule against flinching is simple. You do not dodge until the job is done. Evidence drop flashes, as if from a mission note scribbled in grease pencil on a kneeboard. Aim short, let it skip. Do not climb early. It reads like madness until you watch the geometry work. Late morning, release window measured in heartbeats. Sea state rough. Ships turning. Range collapsing from a mile to a few thousand feet. Seconds to release, dropping fast. Gunfire intensity rising. A fragment from the paperwork reads, after action note fragment, altitude spacing and release timing recorded as the deciding factors. A small open loop pops. Why does the crew talk about short when the target is ahead? 30 to 60 seconds later it closes as the bomb is released, not at the ship, but at the water. And the water does what the bomb needs it to do. The bomb hits, skips, and the horizon seems to tilt as the aircraft roars past. Switch point of view down on a ship's deck. A gunner sees the bomber too low and too fast to be proper. He swings the barrel anyway. He hears the strafing rattle and feels the sting of splinters. He tries to keep his hands steady. For him, the enemy is not an idea. It is a machine that has chosen to be close enough to be personal. Coordination failure shows up again, this time between the bridge and the gunners. Smoke and glare distort depth. A gun director calls a lead that is just wrong enough. The cost is a burst that tears the air behind the aircraft instead of through it, a miss that becomes a reprieve. The crew doesn't celebrate. They just take the next breath they were not promised. Inner conflict line. Red thinks of the troops on the far side of this sea and hates that his survival depends on asking strangers to be exposed to the same fire he is. Small detail. Motif. The sea spray at the wingtips changes meaning here. In Section 1 it was a warning, you are too low. Now it becomes a gauge. If you can feel spray, you are in the range where the new tactic can work. The same sensation that once meant danger now marks opportunity, and that inversion is what adaptation looks like. A small win arrives as another near loss turned into control. The aircraft holds level long enough to make the skip. The water takes the bomb and returns it with intent. The ship's side becomes the meeting point between theory and consequence. The bigger loop tightens if these tactics work here. Do they become the new doctrine? Or are they a one-time gamble that only looks brilliant because it survived? The answer will be written not in speeches, but in what happens to the convoy over the next hours and how many passes the crews can endure before fatigue and coordination failures finally exact their price. The risk lands heavy. The enemy will not stay stunned. The next run will be met by hotter guns, sharper turns, and the brutal reality that once you show a new method, you also teach the other side how to counter it. Section 4. Mast-Height Strafing and the Rule of Seconds, 1109 a.m. The air feels thicker as if the smoke and humidity have weight. The sea is no longer just a backdrop. It is a corridor the bombers must fly through, and it narrows with every pass. Just before noon, seconds decide whether suppression buys life or buys nothing. Coordinated mast height. Strafing is the part of the story that people misunderstand when they only hear the words. It is not bravado. It is a timed act of denial. Deny the deck gunners their heads-up moment. Deny the bridge its calm. Deny the ship the ability to fight cleanly while the bombs arrive. Red Mallory's action becomes repetitive by design. He tracks barrels, then tracks heads, then tracks hands. Body sensation, his shoulders burn from holding posture against recoil. Micro-choice, he chooses to conserve rounds for the moment a gun position wakes back up because wasting ammunition is a slow form of panic. The manual says you avoid flying into small arms and automatic fire. Reality says you fly into it to buy your bombers a clean second. The tactical decision is made by the flight lead and felt by everyone. Stagger the approach so the strafing line hits just before the release line arrives. The cost is coordination stress. Timing becomes the battlefield, and timing is fragile. A late run can expose a bomber to gunners who have already recovered. An early run can waste suppression while bombs are still seconds away. The rule against chaos is simple. You keep your lane even when your body begs you to drift. A fragment from the paperwork reads a debrief note, blunt and unpretty. Strafe masts. Keep heads down. Bombers in trail. No adjectives. Just instructions that mean someone is trying to keep other people alive. Later, 1109 a.m. Second pass. Smoke low. Visibility reduced. Gunners adapting. Red's cheek is damp where it rests against the cold skin of the aircraft, and he notices the absurd intimacy of its skin to metal breath to aluminum. He hears the pilots breathing through the intercom, controlled, almost polite. Each exhale is a decision not to rush. Below the ship's wake scrawls white lines that seem to move faster than they should. The glare turns those lines into false angles, and that's how mistakes start, not with ignorance, but with your eyes being lied to. Passes accumulating. Smoke density rising. Seconds between strafing and release narrowing. Fatigue climbing. A question flickers immediately. Does suppression truly works, or if it's just a story crews tell themselves? Within a minute it ends when Red sees a gunner freeze mid-motion under the sudden rattle of bullets across the deck, and the gun goes silent for the length of a breath. A larger question expands. How many repetitions can a crew survive before discipline becomes habit, and habit becomes a blind spot? It will not fully resolve until later, when fatigue starts to warp decision-making. Switch point of view to the cockpit. The pilot's hands are steady, but his jaw is clenched. He can't see the gun positions the way Red can. He can only feel the aircraft being hit, a thump, a rattle, a vibration that doesn't belong. He must decide whether to pull off early and save the plane, or hold the run to save the mission. That is not a tactical diagram. That is a human spine stiffening against fear. Coordination failure arrives with smoke deception and misread range. The ship turns into its own smoke and the angle changes. Two aircraft call different bearings at once. The cost is a moment of hesitation, a release that comes a breath late. The bomb still skips, but the geometry is tighter, less forgiving. The crew learns that this new method works, but it works only when everyone's inputs match the same reality. Inner conflict line. Red hates that protecting troops can sound noble, because inside the airplane, it feels more like gambling with other people's lungs. Small, detail motif evolves again. The sea spray is no longer just a gauge of altitude. It becomes a timer. When spray turns to mist across the glass, you know you've entered the last seconds before release. It's the ocean tapping the cockpit like a metronome. A small wind the timing holds. The suppression arrives, the release follows, and for one more run, the ship's defenses are forced into reaction instead of control. The risk sharpens, the enemy adapts. Guns begin to wait, not fire. The silence is worse because it means someone is learning. And when both sides are learning at the same time, the next mistake will be punished faster than anyone can correct. Section 5. Doctrine breaks. Discipline holds. At 1:26 a.m., the light changes again, softer, diffused by the same clouds that earlier felt like cover. Now the cloud layer feels like a ceiling pressing down on every decision. The sea is mottled and the ships look like moving shadows with hard edges. Just before noon. When doctrine breaks, discipline is the only thing left. This is the moment the story turns from tactic to doctrine. Not on paper, in the bodies of crews who realize that what they are doing is not an exception. It is a solution to a specific environment. Fast defended targets, where high altitude offers safety, but steals the one thing you need most: certainty. Red Mallory's action is almost domestic. He wipes condensation from a sight window with his glove. Body sensation, the glove is damp and gritty with salt. Micro-choice, he chooses not to complain about the cold, because complaining is a luxury that costs focus. Doctrine promises safety through separation. The night and the sea demand closeness for precision. The tactical decision now becomes a procedural one. Commit to low-level coordination as the main method, not a last resort. The cost is exposure. The cost is also psychological. You must train yourself to accept that too low is sometimes exactly low enough. The rule against overconfidence is simple. You treat every run like the first because the enemy is watching and adapting. A fragment from the paperwork reads a brief as if report line from a staff summary that could fit in a folder without drama. Targets maneuvered. Low-level approach increased hit probability under adverse conditions. It is cold language for warm fear. 1:26 a.m. Third pass begins. Cloud ceiling steady. Visibility uneven. Ships turning more sharply. The airframe feels old in his hands, not because it is failing, but because it has absorbed too many small shocks. Every bolt, every panel seems to have its own voice. Red listens for the wrong note, the sound that means something has shifted, and the absence of that sound becomes its own kind of mercy. He thinks about how doctrine is written in calm rooms, and how the first time it breaks is always loud, turn rate increasing. Defensive fire better timed. Minutes of usable daylight slipping away. Crew fatigue rising. A question flickers immediately: what happens to the bomb if the sea state changes mid-run? It resolves quickly when a wave pattern throws the skip angle off, and the bomb splashes wide, harmless. The lesson is immediate: the sea is a partner you cannot command. You can only read it. A larger question hangs over the run: does the convoy still have a route out, a way to outrun this new method? It will tighten as the convoy's options shrink. Switch point of view to a planning table hours earlier, far from salt spray. A staff officer points at a line on a map, estimating speed and time. The numbers look clean. Then we snap back to the cockpit where the same numbers are being rewritten by smoke, glare, and fear. The mismatch is the heart of the story. Planning is neat. Execution is a living animal. Coordination failure shows up as formation drift. One aircraft, buffeted by turbulence, slides a little low. The cost is a moment where friendly strafing threatens to cross a friendly's nose. Red's chest tightens as he calls it out. The pilot corrects. The formation survives, but the margin is shrinking, and the shrinking margin is the real scoreboard. Inner conflict line. Red realizes that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to hold a straight line while fear screams for a turn. If the environment changes, the correct method becomes the wrong one overnight. Small, detail motif shifts into something like guilt. The spray keeps hitting the glass, and Red starts to measure his own risk by it. If he survives, the spray will dry into salt on the metal. That salt will be a residue of choices. Later, when people call this bold, he will remember salt dried into seams and wonder how many bold stories are just survival stories with better lighting. A small win arrives, not in destruction, but in procedure. The crews begin to communicate more cleanly. Shorter calls, fewer overlaps, better spacing. The new method starts to look less like improvisation and more like discipline in a new costume. And then the risk sharpens. Doctrine has now been challenged in the open. The enemy's gunners and commanders will adjust their own procedures. The next hours will test whether adaptation can stay disciplined or whether the very speed of change will crack the coordination that makes low-level attacks possible at all. Section 6, March 24-1943. The ladder tightens. At 11:44 a.m., the sea is darker, not because the weather has worsened, but because the smoke has layered itself over the water like a second skin. The convoy's wake patterns blur. Distances lie, bearings slide. This is the part of battle that doesn't show up in clean histories. The sensory environment becomes hostile, and your instruments are only as good as the people reading them. Smoke turns numbers into guesses and guesses into danger. The larger story spans March 24-1943, repeated strikes, repeated decisions, and an escalating understanding that the old playbook was being rewritten by necessity. That escalation isn't a straight line. It is a ladder where each rung costs something you didn't want to spend: altitude, time, confidence, and sleep. Red Mallory's action is again the smallest kind of professionalism. He repeats a bearing call back to confirm he heard it. Body sensation, his ears ring from constant engine roar. Micro-choice, he chooses to correct himself when he realizes he almost parroted the wrong number because pride can kill faster than flak. The manual says you can rely on clear visibility and orderly formation. Reality says smoke will turn your best plan into a guess. The tactical decision becomes a coordination decision: reattack in a way that keeps suppression and bombing synchronized, even as smoke and maneuvering distort the picture. The cost is communication load. Too many voices, too many calls, and the radio becomes a fog of its own. The rule against radio chaos is simple. If you're not adding new truth, you stay quiet. Evidence drop arrives like a clipped after-action note. Comms overlapped, corrected by shorter call signs. Maintained trail. You can hear the fatigue between the words. Staff note, low-level approach, increased hit probability against maneuvering targets. Late morning, smoke thick, comms busy, convoy maneuvering. Daylight still harsh. Smoke stings his eyes even behind the glass. His lips taste like cordite and salt, and the headset pads feel swollen with sweat. He realizes fatigue doesn't arrive as collapse. It arrives as tiny shortcuts. A call made a second late, a check skipped because it'll be fine, a glance that lingers on the wrong object. In low-level work, shortcuts are how you fall out of discipline without noticing. Smoke density up. Overlap incidents up. Effective range down. Minutes of clarity per pass decreasing. A fragment from the paperwork reads, after action, note fragment altitude, spacing, and release timing recorded as the deciding factors. A question flickers immediately. Can crews keep track of which ship is which when smoke hides silhouettes? Within a minute it resolves when a crew uses a tiny anchor, the pattern of wake, and the angle of a mast against the light. Identification becomes an art, not a label. A larger question hangs over the run: what does largely destroyed actually mean? In a battle where records and memory can diverge, we do not invent totals here. We only hold to what is consistent. Repeated airstrikes devastated the convoy's ability to reinforce the fight. The outcome is not a number. It is absence supplies that do not arrive, men on the ground who do not face the extra weight they feared. Switch point of view: a planner in a rear headquarters watches reports come in over hours. He sees the same words repeated: attacked, hit, smoke, maneuvering. He feels the temptation to translate it into certainty. Then we snap back to red in the airplane, where certainty is a luxury. The gulf between those perspectives is where mistakes breed. Coordination failure shows up as misread bearing range. Someone calls a contact dead ahead when it is slightly off. The cost is a pass that lines up wrong, forcing a late correction. Late corrections at low level are not smooth. They are violent. The aircraft banks hard. Red's stomach lifts. His harness bites into his shoulder. He tastes that same metal again. Inner conflict line: Red wonders if he will remember this as bravery or as desperation, and he hates that the difference might be decided by whether they live. Small. Detail motif becomes a marker of exhaustion. The spray is still there, but now Red barely notices it. That's the danger. When the sensory warning stops feeling sharp, you're one step closer to treating risk as normal. A small wind, despite smoke and calm, overlap. The crews still coordinate enough to make another accurate low-level approach. The ladder tightens and they climb it anyway. The risk sharpens fatigue is now the next enemy. The environment has changed and the crews have adapted, but adaptation without rest can become a new form of vulnerability. The next section will test whether discipline can survive the slow erosion of bodies that have been vibrating inside aluminum for hours. Section 7. The cost of the new playbook. At 1:03 p.m., the sunlight hits the cockpit at an angle that makes dust float like snow. It is beautiful in the way only indifferent things are beautiful. Outside, the sea continues to throw its spray upward, and the spray continues to mark the altitude that has become both tactic and trap. Luck never signed orders, but it collects the bill anyway. By now, the crews understand that low-level attacks have rewritten a part of Pacific air power, not because they were daring, but because the environment demanded a new answer. Fast defended ships do not wait for perfect theory. They exploit the delay between correct and effective. Red Mallory's action is to check on a crewmate's face without saying the word fear. Body sensation: his fingers are numb where they grip cold metal. Micro-choice: he chooses to crack a small dry joke on the intercom, not to be funny but to keep the crew's voices human. The manual says, you rotate crews and preserve strength for the long war. Reality says the long war is made of short windows you can't miss. The tactical decision shifts towards survival math. How many passes are worth it? How many aircraft can be risked before the mission stops being a mission and becomes a slow, self-inflicted loss? The cost is moral as much as mechanical. Every additional run is another request for luck, and luck has never signed any orders. The rule against wasting lives is simple. You do not spend courage where coordination cannot support it. A fragment from the paperwork reads a fragment that feels like it came from someone's letter draft that never got mailed. We flew so low the ocean tried to climb in with us. It's not an official quote. It's the kind of line a tired man might write when he needs a metaphor because the literal truth is too plain. Just after noon, Fatigue obvious, hands shaking, smoke thinning and thickening in patches, guns still active. In the waist, the air is warmer than it should be. The smell of fuel and oil is steady enough to be comforting, and that comfort scares him because it means his mind is trying to normalize the abnormal. He flexes his fingers to keep feeling in them. He can't afford to become a passenger in his own body. Usable daylight still present. Crew fatigue up. Pass count up. Calm clarity down unless enforced. A question flickers immediately. Can discipline be maintained when bodies start to fail? Within a minute it resolves. When Red hears the flight lead cut radio chatter with a single firm instruction, and the entire net falls quiet. Discipline isn't emotion. It's behavior. A larger question hangs over the run. What is the legacy of this day beyond the ships themselves? That loop will close in the final section where the lesson is carried forward as more than a tactical anecdote. Switch point of view to a ship's bridge. A commander watches the horizon for the next low wave of aircraft. His hands are steady, but his mind is racing. He has learned that altitude is no guarantee of safety. He orders sharper turns, tighter smoke, more alert gunners. Adaptation is not owned by one side. The sea teaches both. Coordination failure comes as conflicting orders. One element is told to hit from one bearing, another from a different bearing, and the overlap risks friendly fire lanes. The cost is delay. Delay is what the Convoy has been buying with smoke and turns. For a moment, the new playbook almost collapses under its own complexity. Then a simple correction, single lane trail, hold fire until clear restores order. The smallest phrase saves the largest risk. Inner conflict line. Red realizes he is no longer afraid of dying as much as he is afraid of surviving and later being unable to explain why he did what he did. Small detail motif becomes a token of memory. The spray dries into a salt film on the inside of the window frame. Red sees it as proof that they were really that low, that it wasn't exaggeration. Salt becomes evidence, and evidence becomes a kind of comfort when the mind wants to turn everything into a story. A small win, the crew completes another run without losing formation integrity. They are not heroes in the moment. They are exhausted workers doing a job at the edge of what the body can do. The risk sharpens. The last risk is not flak or sea. It is meaning. When the war ends, what will this day be? A footnote, a myth, or a lesson about how discipline must travel with adaptation, because otherwise adaptation becomes chaos with a better nickname. Section 8. The daylight run that looked like madness. At 1:12 p.m. The light is brutally clear again, the kind of clarity that makes even a small mistake look loud. The sea has calmed in patches, but the wind still flicks spray up in sharp, sudden bursts, as if the ocean is refusing to let anyone forget how low these aircraft have been living. When surprise dies, only discipline keeps the lane alive. This is the hour that later gets condensed into a single phrase in some retellings. A daylight torpedo run, a reckless low pass the moment air power rewrote itself. The words vary because memory searches for handles. Some veteran stories drift across the calendar. A later date, like April 7, can surface in conversation, the way a misfiled page surfaces in a drawer. Records differ on that point, but the core truth stays fixed in early March. 1943. Crews proved that fast-defended ships could be hit reliably only by meeting them in their own environment. Low, moving, dangerous, and close. Red Mallory's action is small and stubborn. He tightens the strap on his headset so the ear cups seal and the roar doesn't leak into his skull. Body sensation, his temples throb in time with the engines. Micro-choice, he chooses to keep listening for call signs, even when he wants to pull the headset off and exist in silence for 1 minute. Silence would be comfort. Comfort would be sloppiness. The manual says you win by executing the approved method cleanly. Reality says you win by executing the necessary method cleanly. The tactical decision now is about timing a final coordinated approach while the defenses are fully awake. The cost is that surprise is gone. What remains is discipline, and discipline has to be loud enough to drown out instinct. The flight lead calls for a tighter trail, a cleaner lane, a promise that nobody will drift into anyone else's fire. The rule against improvisation is simple. You do not invent new moves mid-run. You execute the plan you agreed to. A fragment from the paperwork reads, debrief, note fragment, tight trail, clean lane, hold fire until clear. Final coordinated approach, defenses alert, sunlight harsh, stress peaking, surprise value near zero, calm discipline critical, spacing tightened, seconds between calls shortened, a small open loop rises if the enemy is ready. Does low level still work, or was it only effective when it shocked them? The loop closes within a minute when the strafing line hits anyway, not as a magic trick, but as a practice denial. Heads go down. A gun pauses. A fraction of a second appears, and the bombing line takes it. The big open loop opens like a crack you can't step around. What happens after this, when these crews go home and someone tries to turn a lived experience into training? That loop will close in the final section when we follow the legacy, into doctrine and into memory. Switch point of view to a ship's gunnery station. The gunner has learned the rhythm now. He waits for the low roar. He times his burst not at the aircraft he sees, but at the lane he expects. He is adapting too. That adaptation creates a new kind of danger, not random fire, but timed fire. The water erupts in tight patterns. The air fills with invisible lines. Coordination failure hits in the ugliest, quietest way. Calm overlap returns at the worst moment. Two voices transmit at once. One calling a minor correction, one calling a warning. The cost is confusion for half a breath, and half a breath at this altitude is a long time. Red feels his stomach lurch as the pilot banks slightly to recenter, and the bank makes the gun mount bite into Red's hip. Pain is information. They are too close to be sloppy. Inner conflict line. Red realizes he is no longer choosing between courage and fear. He is choosing between control and chaos, and he wants control more than he wants comfort. Small. Detail motif evolves again. The spray at the wingtips is no longer just a gauge or a timer. It becomes a signature. It is the physical proof of a method that looks insane until you understand the environment that demanded it. Spray means proximity. Proximity means accuracy. Accuracy in this case means fewer troops on the far shore facing supplies that should have arrived. A small win comes as the formation survives the timed fire. The aircraft holds the lane long enough to complete the run, and the crew feels the relief of having done the most dangerous thing correctly. Not flawlessly correctly. There is a difference, and the difference is survival. The risk sharpens when you learn a method that works. You also learn how fragile it is. One tired call, one drifting wing, one misread wake and glare. The next chapter is not about daring, it is about what you carry forward when the salt dries and the story starts to harden into doctrine. Section 9. Salt on the window, echoes in doctrine. At 1 p.m. The sea finally looks ordinary for a breath. Just water, just wind, just sunlight. That's how it tricks you. It offers a moment of normalcy to make you forget that everything in this space has been weaponized. The weather, the smoke, the glare, the timing, even the spray at the wingtips. Salt on a glove is proof that method became mercy. We return to the big truth: without numbers we cannot prove. Over March 241943. Repeated airstrikes devastated a major reinforcement convoy in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The details of individual moments can blur in memory, and retelling some accounts drift in dates, when men try to anchor trauma to calendar pages. But the consistent outcome remains doctrine changed because the environment forced it. Red Mallory's action is quiet and personal. He scrapes a fingertip along the salt film on the window frame and watches it whiten his glove. Body sensation, his chest hurts when he finally exhales fully. Micro-choice, he chooses to keep that glove unwashed for one more day because if he cleans it, the proof disappears. The manual says war rewards the side with the best procedures. Reality says war rewards the side that adapts procedures without losing discipline. This is the legacy, not a stunt, but a transformation. Low-level tactics and skip bombing paired with coordinated mast-height strafing showed that accuracy under fire could be engineered by proximity by turning risk into a controlled variable. It was a reckless playbook, only to eyes that measured courage by distance. Up close, it was survival math. The rule against myth-making is simple. You respect the real costs, even when the story is tempting. Just after noon, engines easing, radio quieter, smoke lifting in patches, the ocean returning to itself. A fragment from the paperwork reads, Staff summary phrasing low-level approach increased hit probability against maneuvering targets. Radios calmer. Range expanding as aircraft pull away. Fatigue high. A thin margin of daylight still left. A question flickers immediately. What did the crews actually gain by going low? It closes within a minute. They gained hit probability against maneuvering targets under adverse conditions, and they gained a method of suppression that bought the seconds needed for accuracy. In plain language, they gained control inside a chaotic environment. The larger question closes here. What does this change mean for Pacific air power? It means the idea of air attack against ships had to include speed, defense, and environment as equal variables. High altitude remained useful in many contexts, but this battle proved that the correct method can become the wrong one overnight when the target, the weather, and the defenses are not cooperating. If the environment changes, the correct method can become the wrong one overnight. Switch point of view, one last time. Imagine a young crew somewhere else in the Pacific, months later reading a briefing, hearing an instructor explain low-level tactics with a controlled voice. For them, it is doctrine. For Red, it is still salt on a glove and the remembered vibration of metal under his cheek. Coordination failure is acknowledged as part of the lesson, not a flaw to hide. Comms overlap, misread bearings, formation drift, each carries a cost, and the only reason the new tactics worked is that discipline was deliberately tightened around them. Adaptation did not replace discipline. It demanded more of it. Inner conflict line, Red wonders whether he is proud or simply relieved, and he accepts that both can be true without canceling each other out. He pictures the ocean a year from now, just water again, and wonders if anyone who wasn't there will understand how close method and mercy can sit together in one moment. He decides the only honest way to remember is to keep the sensory truth attached. The spray, the salt, the strain, so the story can't float away into slogans. Salt is a small thing. On an ordinary day, it's a nuisance. In a cockpit over the Bismarck Sea, it became evidence proof that the crew chose proximity because the situation demanded it. In life, the details that cling to you are often the truth you need later. Soldiers Lost Voices is here to ask you this. What habit that saved you? A rule you broke for the right reason? A procedure you rewrote without losing discipline? When your environment changes, don't cling to the old altitude just because it feels safe. Adapt, but keep your spacing, your checks, your calm voice. The smallest detail can carry the loudest echo for you. That's Soldiers Lost Voices, where the smallest details still carry the loudest echoes. What small detail stayed with you in this story? The spray, the salt, or the timing? And what wartime decision under pressure should we step into next? What rule would you keep when conditions change fast?